Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Khalid Bhat. Today is Friday, the 6th of October, 2023. We've got lots of interesting stuff to discuss with you, to decipher. So let's begin without further ado. We'll begin, ladies and gentlemen, with the European Union that has extended Pakistan's GSP status, GSP plus status, rather, for a further period of 4 years till 2027. The EU Parliament voted on the GSP plus status for Pakistan with 561 votes in favor. We all know how important the market of the European Union is for Pakistani producers, and how important it is also for the manufacturers in Pakistan, how they've benefited since the GSP plus started. And this whole avenue of the GSP plus is extremely lucrative for the Pakistani businessmen, and the extension for 4 years comes as a huge sigh of relief for the business community in Pakistan. This is going to be our first segment. Also, we'll be adding the rupee that has further gained momentum against the dollar during the course of this segment. Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the Afghan transit trade that, as per reports, has widely been misused in the past as well. Pakistan, as you very well know, has tightened the grip on transit trade import regime as well. Kabul, as per the figures, has imported $7.3 billion worth of goods via Pakistan in the year 2022-2023. Pakistan also currently hosts 1.4 million Afghan refugees, as has been said by the Foreign Office. And we all know about the November 1st deadline for all the illegal foreigners, including Afghans, to leave the country. You can see that on the side of our screen. The number of days is flashing constantly. Then the next story concerns Iran's Nargis Mohammadi, who's won the Nobel Peace Prize for 2023, who's been honored for her fight to promote human rights. Then we'll be talking about Namira Salim. We talked about her before as well, but we would like to highlight, because today is the day she is going to set foot in space. She's the first Pakistani to do so, and also the first Pakistani to visit the North Pole. We have had a lot of messages congratulating her from caretaker Prime Minister Anwar Kakar to others as being the first Pakistani and the woman to have done that. She's going to embark on this space exhibition, of course, the space expedition with the Virgin Galactic. And finally, we'll be talking about another achievement by another Pakistani, and that is Shehroz Kashif, who has conquered the 8,188 meters Cho peak. He's the world's youngest climber to have summited 13 peaks that are of 8,000 meters or plus. His next task, as per what he's saying, is to climb the Shishapangma in China. He's also likely to ascend all these 14 peaks at the age of 21. Wow, what a feat for them. Nala Kiani and Sibraz Khan have also gone up the peak scale, this peak of Cho as we speak. So good news at the end, but lots of important things to discuss with you. Without further ado, let's begin our conversation, and to discuss our first segment that concerns the European Union, the GSP plus, the rupee strengthening against the dollar, and more. We've been joined by Dr. Usman Chohan. He's a senior economist who is in the studios with us. Thank you very much, Dr. Usman, to have joined us, and welcome back after a hiatus in the studios for Newsroom.
Thank you.
How do you see this decision taken by the European Parliament to extend the GSP plus status for Pakistan for another 4 years? How important is it for Pakistan in the current scenario when Pakistan wants to strengthen its economy?
Oh, I think it's wonderful news. If you look at a single country basis, the United States is very important as an importer for us, but when you add up all the European countries, EU members, they become more important as a consolidated market. And so GSP Plus is a decision that they take to level the playing field for certain commodity types among countries that normally would not get as much access or would be relegated because of dumping practices or because of other things. So it is a very nice measure, and it's always contingent on adhering to certain stipulations that you govern and you manage your affairs in a decent enough way, and Pakistan does that, and which is a very good sign. And GSP Plus therefore gives a preferential access to our exporters in certain areas where we derive a lot of foreign exchange.
And which are those areas for all those who do not know?
Well, the most prominent one is, of course, the textile and affiliated or cognate fields. This includes your bed linens, your towels, and that sort of medium to low value added consumer discretionary for household items. And so European markets, they are now through GSP Plus allowing these items to be given on a certain concessional accessibility to our exporters in these sectors.
How have the last few years been for Pakistani exporters as far as the GSP Plus is concerned?
It's something that they've always wanted, and that is because these are product lines or line items where it's difficult to distinguish purely on quality. This is to say that you normally might not care where your bed linen comes from. It's not like so. Therefore, having the GSP Plus is an accessibility factor that helps our exporters. Now, it is supposed to level the playing field, and therefore, in the long run, you and I are both long-term oriented people, so we would want one day that Pakistan doesn't rely on such things because it is already so developed a country that it doesn't need this pathway for exports. It's just that big an exporter.
How do you see the 561 votes that came in favor of the extension of the GSP Plus? Do you feel that the countries that form part of the European Union are satisfied with Pakistani businessmen's business ethics and the way the GSP Plus has been, or Pakistan, and this collaboration through the GSP Plus between the EU and Pakistan?
Absolutely. The fact that it's 561 votes is a reflection that the parliamentarians from many different nationalities within the EU have come at the conclusion that it is worth it to do it. And I think it's a very positive sign that they assess our market and our governance overall, as well as our business ethics, as you mentioned. When they look at it's quite a strict rubric, and so meeting those standards is good, and it's for a reason. It's good for us to meet those standards anyways.
All right, now the caretaker Commerce Minister Gohar Ijaz says, and I quote, EU is a big market for Pakistani exporters. How big a market is it compared to other markets like that of the US, like that of Central Asian countries, like that of other Asian countries?
Well, unfortunately, we have a concentration of our exports in only a limited number of markets, where our biggest import partners are the US, and then on a consolidated basis, the EU is actually very large, it's the biggest. So I would like us to diversify because the increasing role of emerging markets in the world economy suggests that they would be an appetite for our exports everywhere. And so I wouldn't want an undue reliance on Europe, particularly because, you know, their economies are not growing as fast as those of Africa or Asia. And that's why I think there's places closer to home where you can export.
Even Africa is a huge market for Pakistani producers.
That's correct. It's a huge market. It's also a very fast-growing one. And therefore, doing market research is the most important thing. To know what their tastes are and how we can accommodate those tastes with our exports would be a huge plus for us, for sure.
All right. Now, I'd like to also, refer to what the Commerce Minister Gohar Ijaz said, and he talked about the implementation of the 27 EU conventions under the GSP scheme that were, of course, adhered to by Pakistan. What are these 27 EU conventions? How important are these, and how limiting or not are these as far as Pakistani businessmen and Pakistani exports are concerned?
Well, that's a very good question, because there's 27 points. It's quite similar, to, if you remember, to the FATF's 27 points at one point. They put out a list.
I'd not like to make the comparison between the FATF and the GSP Plus.
Nor would I, but it's only to mention that there's in fact several things that are, quite a few things that are looked at. And as you had suggested earlier, the business ethics, business practices are a part of that, but the overall governance, the human rights situation, everything is taken into a full context. And so it's not easy to meet these standards, but it's a good bargain. So the EU is doing this as a kind of corporate and ESG, environmental social governance thing, where it expects you that so long as you do these things and you're a least developed country or an underdeveloped country, then you have the opportunity to have preferential access. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that our industries, some of them are simply not competitive without some sort of assistance. Now, that's not true for many that leverage GSP Plus, but in general, the fact that we require forms of assistance to be competitive is unfortunate, because competing on the world markets isn't easy, and once you have a kind of cozy thing where some kind of assistance is given, you often don't go that extra mile, and that's unfortunate for us. So oftentimes there is this thing, the fact that we're even talking about it is that we require these things when we really shouldn't. We should be competitive without these sorts of things.
I totally agree with you on that. I'd like to refer to what the EU ambassador to Pakistan, Reena Kyomka, said in a post on Twitter, now it's called X. She says the rollover is proposed so as to avoid a cliff edge at the end of 2023. It is unrelated to Pakistan's performance or that of any other beneficiary country. EU member states will decide soon. Monitoring will continue. I had interviewed the previous EU ambassador, and she had told me that there is normally there's not a rollover of GSP plus, but a new GSP plus that is signed between the EU and Pakistan. Why hasn't that happened to date? Is there any delay, and that is why the rollover has taken place?
You know, a rollover is just an easier way to do things. If you have to negotiate one, it takes everybody's time to reappraise how things are, and putting all of those rubrics in front of you, it takes a lot of effort. That's the first thing. And as the cliffhanger point is also true, because right now the global economy is very jittery, which means that if you have a certain preferential thing in place, if you suddenly withdraw it, suddenly many places might be disrupted too negatively, and that's probably not what the EU wants. What it wants is for designing the global economy in a way that suits its values, and its values include having conformity with environmental, social governance, etc. That means that it was just easier to have it rolled over rather than forcing a new evaluation, which is a kind of a tug of war, and it's a lot of effort. It's probably not worth anybody's time, really.
But Usman, to understand a little bit, do you feel now that the new GSP plus will only be proposed at the end of 2027, after the 4 years of the rollover are ended, or will it be proposed even during this time period?
That is a possibility. That is a possibility, and really depends on the climate in the EU in terms of the appetite for having these things. Perhaps there are certain events which lead the parliamentarians to bring it to the forefront. But of course, as you can imagine, EU parliamentarians are very, very busy on their Eastern Front, or dealing with the US and China. There's so many things on their plate that if they have to legislate or appraise or do oversight, maybe this isn't the #1 priority right now.
Let's talk about, let's talk about priorities. Do you feel EU-Pakistan trade becomes or is a priority one way or the other for the European Union, for the EU parliamentarians, for the businesses or the businessmen in the EU? And what can Pakistan do to further enhance that trade with the EU?
Oh, this is a very good question. I believe that it is important, but it is only insofar as the EU now thinks of Asia as its future for trade. That means that when it looks at a portfolio of Asian countries, it's taking them very, very seriously, much more than it would have 10 or 15 years ago. Now that means that it will look at this portfolio and decide which are the most competitive, and fortunately and unfortunately, Asia is a very competitive place because it includes industries like China and Vietnam and so on, which means that Pakistan has to kind of nudge its way in and find its own place, ideally not on a preferential basis. Now, insofar as it's important, well, it's certainly important to us, but we should diversify out. And the EU, it is important for them, and EU businessmen generally express a degree of satisfaction when, especially when things are stable. So it's our job to make sure things are stable and they're happy to grow the volume of business.
Okay, when you speak of growing the volume of business, there's a process of this GSP plus and how the countries or the parliamentarians monitor it. I'd like you to explain to our audience, including myself, who does not know much about the mechanism of the GSP plus. How does the European Union monitor the GSP plus beneficiary countries' compliance with these 27 international conventions, and what is the reporting process as far as the EU's GSP plus is concerned?
Well, to put a long story short, it's a very rigorous process, and that means that it has both the intermittent phases as well as the sequential important decisions that are made. And the important sequential decisions that are made happen after certain intervals, as for example in 2023, which is looking forward to 2027, and as you alluded to earlier, there might be some decisions in the meantime, since this time it is rolled over. But regularly there is an appraisal done, and there are experts who assist Parliament on doing this stuff, and they look at the same 27 points, and they see each of the countries that is eligible, because it's not just Pakistan that's eligible, and they look and see that, okay, in generality it seems that they conform in this, and they offer some leeway on some of the categories. But since there's an intermittent appraisal and experts do put in their point, generally parliamentarians are always likely to say yes unless there is some major hiccup, and Pakistan doesn't have that sort of problem. So I always expected that this GSP would continue.
All right. Of course, I mean, there was no apprehension of the sort that pointed towards the fact that there would not be an extension of the GSP Plus. It was just the wait and see on when it would happen and how it would happen. So the rollover makes, as you yourself said, things easier. What now? What should Pakistan do, in your point of view, in these 4 years? What should Pakistan's priorities be in the economic sector, especially concerning the EU?
Well, this is an excellent question, because the post-COVID era has been so disruptive that it is very difficult to think beyond the next 24 hours, to be honest with you. Now, in COVID, if you recall, our industrialists made a lot of investment thanks to facilities that were offered, such as what's called the TERF. TERF. And so capacity was expanded, but unfortunately what happened since then on energy prices, energy costs, as well as domestic demand and so on, meant that whatever they had invested in, they could not recoup it immediately. So now we are seeing a 2 to 3 year gap between that capital expenditure made and what they were supposed to sell. And some industries had other issues, more localized issues that led to foreclosure, which means that the excess capacity sits on. So if we look forward to the next 4 years, the ideal would be that we not just catch up to what we had before, but to leverage this additional excess capacity that we have generated. And this involves not just domestic demand growth, which struggles with inflation, which is a global phenomenon, but also that the global economic situation, if it improves, we should expect that demand abroad to absorb this capacity that's been invested. And that's how I see the next 4 years, to catch up to what we had before and then go the extra mile.
All right, let's come to Pakistani rupee versus dollar, Usman. A lot of good news thanks to the efforts that are being made by this current caretaker government to stabilize the rupee vis-a-vis the dollar. How do you see, for example, I'll just cite one example, the structural reforms that have been proposed by the State Bank of Pakistan to control appreciation of the Pakistan rupee against the US dollar. How do you see that? How maintainable is it in the long run, and what needs to be done in order to make it maintainable in the long run?
Now, this is a very piece of very good news. As you said, I'm delighted by this. I was extremely distressed by the trajectory of the rupee previously. So the fact that this caretaker government has taken these important steps is a very positive sign. The important thing to realize is that when we sit in our ivory towers, we don't often realize that on the ground there are nefarious actors who act, they may not necessarily be bad people, but they act in their vested interests without looking at the national interest. And in our ivory towers we don't realize that, but it is a big deal. So when our business community, for example, told the authorities that it is important to strike and strike hard, and the fact that they decided to do that, it really did make a difference. Above all, it changes sentiment. And the foreign exchange markets are 24-hour markets, open all the time, and they're very sentiment prone. So very sensitive. And that means that when you set the right signal, you say a momentum. That means that, for example, we've had 22 consecutive days of appreciation. So once the momentum starts, things continue to improve.
Because that is also because of the fact that there are actions being taken every single day also against the holders.
That's a very good point. And that is part of sustaining that momentum. Now, it is important to see the question of sustainability. To be honest with you, I could never imagine that the rupee would have sunk to the level it did. So I believe that it can appreciate far higher. I mean, it's very hard to come to terms with what it had gone down to, which at one point was 307. I couldn't believe this. So I believe that the natural rate is a much stronger number. So that momentum should arrive at that, with the proviso that the actions continue to take place. But there is a point where it won't just be about good sentiment and playing whack-a-mole, which is to smack a few people left, right, and center, but actually to see what strengthens your currency. And the strength of your currency always depends on the demand for your currency. This means that, for example, remittances have to come back to previous levels, if not higher. Exports have to come to previous levels, and you generate foreign exchange so that people pay for your But
you have to generate sentiment for that, don't you? For the remittances to come back to Pakistan the way they were at one time, for the exports to increase the way they were as well, and even much higher, to a much higher level. You need a certain sentiment from the business community. You need a certain sentiment from the expatriates that are living across the world to send those remittances.
It's very true. It's very true.
How do you push them to do that?
Well, one way is the policy measures. The policy measures have been very good. For example, the State Bank of Pakistan has looked very seriously at what the foreign exchange dealership market is. And what they have done is remove this two-tier attitude. You really have to have a certain amount of capital and conform to a certain level of quality quality to be able to deal in Forex, and that's the long and short of it. What you're ultimately aiming for is to dissuade people from using the traditional systems of Hawala and Hundi. And you're trying to reduce the distortions between the open market rate and the interbank rate. You want them to be very close. This is also a requirement stated by the IMF that there shouldn't be big distortions. Previously, this meant that your interbank rate was constantly chasing downward the open market. Now, instead, the open market is going so good that the interbank has to catch up. So this is a very good sign.
But we also have to, relate to what the IMF has given us as a conditionality, that the rate of the interbank versus the rate in the open market needs to be more or less similar.
There shouldn't be too much deviation between them, and ideally they should be 1 for 1, because that would be a fair deal for you, right, if you need to get a foreign currency. And the other thing is, it's not just a price thing, but a supply thing. So if you have a price that is very favorable, you will actually go out and probably change currency. If enough people do that, the currency will turn the other way. And so the question will then be supply, and do we have enough supply of the foreign exchange? Again, we go back to the motivating factors that you mentioned. Get your remittances, get your exports. These are the things that matter. Absolutely.
But I think any society or strengthening of the society comes from the individuals, comes from a collective effort, and that collective effort is being seen now, and I hope that collective effort continues, and it is not deemed a short-term collective effort, but the same sentiment that we are seeing as far as catching the culprits, taking care of our currency and our economy should continue in the long run, because it's extremely pertinent and important for Pakistan to stabilize itself and to recover itself economically. Speaking of that, how do you see the administrative measures that have been taken to control currency smuggling, hoarding in Pakistan, and do you feel the impact on the currency market has been sufficient, or will we see much more in the coming days?
I think it is a very good start. So there is no need to say that enough hasn't been done. Enough has been done, but more should always be done. And more means vigilance, because there is always a tendency in society, which is what you were just saying, for people to look at their vested interest and at society. And in the recent times, unfortunately, a lot of people engaged in hoarding behavior because they were panicked. So you have to be able to work together to tell one another that things are all right. And then this hoarding behavior dissipates because there's no reason to hold on to it. That's what you saw with these companies that had their savings, as well as individuals, bring their foreign exchange back into the market because they said, all right, looks like things are okay. And so you have to have this reassuring system, and to be honest with you, that is the most important thing for government, and in economics this is the most important thing for a central bank to do, is to maintain good sentiment and stability, to make sure that things are all right, for agents to do what they need to do.
I think that's very important. Also, finally, before we move on to the second story, the surge in Pakistan's rupee value, do you feel it has affected the import costs and the country's dependence on foreign goods as well?
I don't, and I never bought this argument that if the rupee becomes cheaper, it's good for exporters, because the fact that yours is cheaper, it's not that that is the main factor. It's not the main factor in determining whether people buy your stuff or not. You have to focus more on quality, and it's an external demand function. So having a cheaper rupee is not good for us at all. We should have a strong rupee, or a reasonably strong rupee, which puts the balance between our import requirements as well as our exports. That's what we need. I don't buy this cheapening for the sake of having good exports. It never worked for us. And so the converse isn't true.
What about the import costs?
Having a stronger rupee is better in that case, because it means that what you need to purchase, you have to pay for your energy requirements in dollars, for example. That exchange rate looks better. You have to pay less, so it's better for you. So having a moderate, competitive currency is what we need.
All right, wonderful. This, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of the first segment, but of course, Usman Chohan, we've requested him to stay on for the second segment that is also somehow directly and indirectly related to the economy. How do you see the measures taken by the interim administration to ban the import of smuggling-prone goods by Afghanistan? How is that going to impact Pakistan's economy?
It'll be a very big plus. The fact that we have these problems of cross-border smuggling and all these issues create major distortions in our economy. It leads to a foreign exchange problem. It leads to bad quality stuff coming into your markets too, when we talk about confectionaries and stuff, substandard goods without quality assurance. So we are a victim of not having a proper cross-border regularized trade system. We're going to do our part now, and it's a very positive step, both in terms of the goods moving across the border as well as people moving across the border. This is the norm, and that's what our foreign minister has said. This is the norm for all countries. Why should we be any different? I will remind you that Pakistanis are the most hospitable people on earth, but every society has its ultimate limits, because the way that we have faced economic challenges, it simply isn't that you can open your door to just whomever, and that isn't an irrational behavior. The other speaker has correctly mentioned that the United States or any other country has proper systems for people to come, and it's not that their borders are closed, but it's that they expect people to follow rules and come here so that they contribute to the society where they are, and they also gain, and that's the same we expect as well.
All right. Usman, last two questions I'd like quick answers. Specific items such as black tea and tires have been banned from import by Afghanistan through Pakistan. Do you feel these bans have affected trade? A, and B, how do you see the positive reactions of organizations like the All Pakistan Textile Mills Limited, the Pakistan Business Council regarding the recent measures that have been taken to address the misuse of transit trade? Two sides to this question.
On both angles, I fully agree with the assessments of the Business Council and the Textile Mills Association, because the fact is that this cross-border void is very, very damaging for us, and the fact that we are remedying things, better late than never. In fact, I would posit it to you that there are 6 things that will improve. There are 6 problems that are solved through these measures we are taking. The first is that there is a drug problem created by this illegal presence. The second is a crime problem. The third is a shop problem, because their businesses compete in places like Board Bazaar in Peshawar, if you're familiar with that. There's a house problem, so they make the prices of our house, both for rental and for purchase, too expensive, even here in Islamabad. There's a job problem, because they undercut the wages that people can get. And then there's a goods problem, where there's substandard things moving around, which is not. So if you can solve 6 problems with one fly swatter, I think it's a very good idea.
And the reaction, of course, coming from the Pakistani associations is quite heartening, to say the least, isn't it? Yes. So which means that they're going to comply with whatever curbs have been put, and they'll move in the right direction. And it is good for business, it's good for them, it's good for Pakistan's economy. What retaliatory actions do you feel Afghanistan could take to affect Pakistan's exports to Central Asia via the Afghan territory? Any possibility of that?
In our connectivity vision, Afghanistan is important to us, to China, to Central Asia. So you do need Afghanistan on board. But if they're going to be petty about this, if they're going to mess around, then this tit-for-tat stuff is something we don't expect. I mean, we should hope for the best, and of course we have to look at our national interest first. There's only so far they can go. That's why they have been creating problems for us since pre-1947, and you know, neighbors have to live amongst each other, and it's better that things are resolved amicably and peacefully for the prosperity of both nations, really.
Finally, when you look at the transit trade between Afghanistan and Pakistan and the long history of it all, what do you think have been the ups and downs, and do you feel there's going to be a positive trajectory after this curb on the misuse of this Afghan transit trade?
I cannot say that it's ups and downs. It's been downs and downs. It's a very difficult thing for Pakistan, and it's because there has been, if I look at the long arc of history since over the past 75 years, it's been a parasitic relationship, and Pakistan has given and hasn't asked for much in return. And when you don't ask for something in return, you end up giving far too much. So the fact that Pakistan is taking decisions that are in its economic interest, which are not illegal, nothing wrong with what we're doing, then I think that's fine. Afghanistan has to understand that Pakistan also has its own interests, and it has given so much. Maybe Afghanistan should, for once and for all, appreciate what Pakistan has done and continue to do that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Usman Chohan, to have joined us and to have given us a very broad perspective of how important Pakistan's economy is vis-a-vis the GSP plus, vis-a-vis the Afghan Transit Trade Agreement, and we are only seeing good things that will happen for Pakistan in the coming days, in the coming weeks, because of all the maneuvering that has been done, of all the proper initiatives that have been taken by the Pakistani authorities, by the Pakistani administration. And let's hope this stays in the right vein, this stays on its right path, and this stays long term. I think these are very important factors that I'm sure you as well, Usman, would like to concur with me. Let's come to our last 3 stories, ladies and gentlemen, very quickly. The first concerns the Nobel Peace Prize that has been awarded to Iranian women's rights campaigner Nargis Mohammadi. She was honored for her right to promote human rights and freedom for all, according to Bert Rice Anderson, head of the Norwegian Nobel Committee in Oslo. This was the 5th Nobel Prize to be awarded this week. On Monday, the final Nobel Prize for Economic Sciences will also be announced. Next, of course, comes a very interesting aspect that we have highlighted with you in the past as well, and that is of Namira Salim, who is going to create history today when she becomes the first Pakistani to reach space, to enter space via a Virgin Galactic plane. She did write on Twitter, or X if you can call it that, proud to fly the national flag high in space, inshallah, on the 6th of October, and that of course is today. There might be some time difference, but of course it is today, the 6th of October. The other 2 passengers on this flight are British advertising executive Trevor Beetle and American astronomy educator Ron Rosano. Of course, both Beth Moses, who is Virgin Galactic's chief astronaut instructor, will also be joining the trio. What a wonderful time to live in, where you see Pakistani filmmakers gearing up for Oscars and getting Oscars and Emmys, when you see Pakistani women flying into space and flying Pakistani flag high, when you see Pakistani women climbing all the summits, all the important peaks, and also making Pakistan's name shine amongst the world community. And that is so wonderful, so heartening to know on a Friday evening of all things. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about Shehroz Kashif. I was talking about, going to the mountains and climb every mountain, climb every peak. This was a very famous song a couple of decades back. Nevertheless, people like Shehroz Kashif make that possible. He has accomplished a tremendous achievement today on the 6th of October 2023 by successfully reaching the top of Chohan, which is located in Tibet in China at a height of 8,188 meters, sorry, not feet but meters, being the 6th tallest mountain on earth. Chohan makes this achievement very noteworthy. Now he has scaled, Shehroz Kashif has scaled 13 of the 14 summits that are higher than 8,000 meters as we speak. And what he wants to do, he wants now to climb another peak which is 8,027 meters high. If he does climb it at the age that he climbs it, he would have turned 21 when he would have climbed 14 peaks that are above 8,000 meters high. Wonderful achievement. Congratulations, Shehroz. We stand by you and we wish you all the very best. I hope we get to see you once you return back to Islamabad. With that, we end this edition of Newsroom. It's the last day of the week. We'll inshallah see you Monday with news story segments that pertain to us, you and Pakistan. Before I go, conjunctivitis is on the rise. So is a lot of mosquito bite related diseases such as dengue. So be very careful when you venture outside and be very wary. Take the necessary precautions. Allah Hafiz.